Mjabuliseni Madondo has dismissed with costs the latest attempt by Prince Mbonisi Zulu to halt the coronation of King Misuzulu, kaZwelithini. It's scheduled to take place on the 28th of May. Let me take you to our reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who's watching the story. So, Ziyanda, what formed the crux of the prince's case and why he believes that postponing that coronation is the best thing to do right now?
So Prince Mbonisi was one of the three applications that were brought before Judge Mjabuliseni Madondo. The first was that of Queen Dlamini Zulu, who was contesting the fact that in the March judgment handed down by Madondo, he didn't give a declaratory order basically nullifying the other 5 marriages of the late King Ziyanda Ngcobo. The second part is that of the 2 princesses who were contesting the will of the late king, and then of course Prince Mbonisi Zulu, who had initially filed papers to hold what he thought would be a coronation on the 3rd of December. Now the proceedings today kicked off then with the lawyers of Queen Dlamini Zulu, that's Nigel Redman, arguing that Judge Mjabuliseni Madondo should have recused himself because he officiated over one of the weddings of the late king with his last wife, Mafu. Let's listen to the exchange between the two, Kathy.
My Lord, Your Lordship will recall at the commencement of the proceedings, I indicated to Your Lordship that it had come to our attention that there was a newspaper article where it had suggested that you had presided over the marriage of the sixth marriage of the late Isilo. The application for recusal is on record, my Lord.
When was it made?
My Lord, there was an urgent application. There was an urgent application brought for Your Lordship's recusal, which was brought after the hearing of the matter, the following week, I think, but before judgment was handed down.
Okay, before you go on,
yes, my Lord.
Was it made during the hearing?
No, my Lord. Your Lordship would not allow
what you are appealing against?
Your Lordship would not allow me to stand down in order to investigate and determine whether we should bring the recusal application. It was not brought during the course of the hearing, but it was certainly brought before judgment was handed down, my Lord.
I can't be a judge or a witness. But what I'm asking, because if we appeal against something on record.
Yes.
So what I want clarity on, whether was it made?
Yes, my Lord. There was an application which was made. My Lord, there was an application.
During the hearing?
Not during the hearing, my Lord. It was brought prior to judgment. But it's on record, my Lord. I understand that it was served. It was served and delivered on the 17th of January 2022, prior to judgment being granted, my Lord.
So as you can hear there, Kathy, there was a bit of a debate about whether or not then the lawyers of Queen Dlamini Zulu had actually made a formal recusal application for Judge Mjabuliseni Madondo. The second part then that they also wanted to attend to, which they believed was grounds for them to file an application for leave to appeal, was the validity of the other 5 marriages of the late Isilo. And they were saying that this has a material impact on the issue of the will, which is part of the application that was brought by the 2 princesses, saying that, the court had an obligation to issue a declaratory order nullifying the other 5 marriages, because this would have an impact then on when the estate of the late King Ziyanda is wound up, and she still maintains that she's entitled to 50% of the late King's estate. Let's hear what Redman had to say earlier.
In Your Lordship's judgment relating to the 2nd and 3rd claim, Your Lordship made much of the fact that the incumbent king, or the Prince Misuzulu, had an entitlement to the throne by virtue of the fact that he was born of a royal marriage. Now that means that the marriage itself, Your Lordship placed great emphasis on the validity of the marriage, and the fact that the marriage was one of royal blood. My understanding is from your Lordship's judgment, your Lordship opines that the preclusion that the king could get married under any other regime was something which flowed from the nature of the civil marriage. We would submit, yes, that is correct. One cannot, if one is married civilly and one chooses civil law, one cannot subsequently get married in a polygamous relationship under any other marital regime. The marriage precluded the late Isilo from getting married to anyone else. Once he was married by civil law, he was precluded from getting married to anyone else. Your Lordship determined that question had already been answered by the courts.
Of course, the big question, Ziyanda, is whether or not this case has any material bearing on the standing of King Misuzulu as the king and that coronation that is scheduled to take place next month.
Absolutely, and you'll recall that when we were here on the 2nd of March, Judge Madondo had said that the will of the late king and the succession battle and the identification and nomination of Prince Misuzulu to become king are not correlated, and there's absolutely no link between the two. So similar arguments being made here today by Advocate Griffiths Madonsela, saying that, you know, a meeting was held by the royal family on the 14th of May. And interestingly, this is when now Nigel Redman, who was also representing the princesses, said, well, actually, that's incorrect. The princesses were sent an SMS that they would be invited to a cleansing ceremony, that they weren't told that there would be a meeting for the identification and nomination of the successor to the throne. And this was also squashed by Griffiths Madonsela, saying that he had a confirmatory affidavit from Prince Mbonisi Zulu saying that he personally called the princesses and told them that they should be, as the rightful members of the royal family, to be a part of that meeting where the succession issue would be discussed. Let's listen in.
And this whole issue by the applicant that they were only called for a cleansing ceremony was dealt with thoroughly in the alternate affidavit. Of course, the alternate affidavit went on to say who was at the meeting and who participated in the meeting, from which house that person came from, and who each of those members represented. It was only there, when the writing was on the wall, that when it was already established in the affidavit, it referenced the minutes of the meeting of the 1st of May, that the applicant started with a narrative of saying, yeah, now we agree that there is a meeting, as if they agree with the meeting, but this meeting was not properly constituted.
So to answer your question, Kathy, as things stand, the coronation is going ahead on the 28th of May, unless then the lawyers of Prince Mbonisi, who is being represented by Advocate Thabani Masuku and Nigel Redman, directly petition the Supreme Court of Appeal, where they will now be arguing that this court has erred in not granting them leave to appeal. But certainly, I guess one would wonder if this will be done and whether or not they will have the ear of the Supreme Court of Appeal before the 28th of May.
Ziyanda, no shortage of controversy on that journey to that coronation. Let's leave it there for tonight.